All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to FWMD Live. It is Mental Health Awareness Month and also the inaugural Mental Health Action Day. That's a new one. And today we are going to be chatting about how educators can fight off COVID-19 fatigue and still provide high quality education for students on all levels of education. We have medical experts from the TCU and UNT HSC School of Medicine, and we also have a very special guest, an education expert, joining us from TCU for our conversation today. So this should be a good one. But before we get to that, let's start with me. I'm Prescott Stokes III, the Integrated Content and Marketing Manager here at the TCU and UNT HSC School of Medicine. And today I am happy to have Dr. Jennifer Allie joining us for our conversation today. How you doing, Dr. Allie?
I'm doing well, Prescott. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
All right, we are very happy to have you. I want to let everybody know that Dr. Allie is the Senior Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs and also an Associate Professor of Medical Education here at the School of Medicine. She holds a Ph.D. in Higher Education and Leadership and an MPA degree from the University of Utah. All right, and we also have Dr. Debra Atkisson joining us for our conversation as well. How you doing, Dr. Atkisson?
I'm doing well today. I'm really glad we're talking about this important topic.
All right, and we are so happy to be able to get some good information out there. I just want to let everybody know that Dr. Atkinson is a psychiatrist in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and she is also an associate professor and physician development coach here at the School of Medicine. And we also have our very special guest, Professor Curby Alexander, joining us for our conversation today. How you doing, Professor Alexander?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
All right. I want to let everybody know that Professor Alexander actually holds a Ph.D. in instructional technology and is an associate professor of professional practice in the TCU College of Education. He teaches courses on the foundations of education, instructional methods, digital communication and collaboration, and experiential education. Now, if you would like to be a part of our conversation, it's really simple. All I need you to do is jump into the comments section, ask any questions you have about education and mental health for educators, and then I will definitely get you some answers from our experts. But before we get to those questions, I am going to start our conversation with Dr. Atkisson today. Dr. Atkisson, can you just kind of set the tone and explain to us what is wellness for educators, and why is it important that educators don't confuse their own wellness with something like diet and exercise, which is what most people will use the word wellness used in relation to?
You know, Prescott, I'm glad you asked that question because I think there's a lot of categorization of wellness as being something related to appearance, like do you look good? Is your diet good? Is exercise good? And it is true that that physical aspect of diet and exercise is important, but wellness actually is the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. And it's an active pursuit. It's not a static pursuit. It's something that we pursue our whole lives. There are a number of dimensions of wellness. I think the 6 areas we should all be thinking about is that physical dimension of wellness, where what you eat and how your exercise comes into play, but also the mental aspects of wellness, what we're thinking about, what we're choosing to put into our minds and consider, the emotional aspect of wellness, how we connect to others, how we take care of ourselves emotionally, the spiritual aspect of wellness, whatever your faith tradition is, the social aspect of wellness. None of us, I think we've learned during this pandemic, none of us are on an island by ourselves. And that's so important. And then the last thing is that environmental connection, how we interact with the environment, with nature. All of those things I think are so important. They're all important aspects of wellness.
And Dr. Atkinson, I do want to ask you a question. Today is the inaugural Mental Health Action Day. And one thing that you kind of see out about mental health is stress, right? And there's 2 versions. There's acute stress and then there's chronic stress. Can you just kind of explain for us what is that loop and how does it affect educators?
So this affects everybody, and I think it particularly hit educators very hard, and I'll comment on that in a moment in terms of how they had to adapt. But that acute stress loop, we all felt it in the middle of March when the pandemic sidelined all of us, and we had to scramble to get some sense of normalcy, while at the same time we were trying to get some sense of safety, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. So what did it do for all of us? It made all of us more anxious. So we were all in a heightened state of awareness, and the human body can only tolerate that for so long. So after a number of weeks and months of this, we moved from that acute state of being anxious, on edge, trying to cope, to a chronic state. And that began to shift the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal gland axis. All of us have that operating all the time, that delicate and important balance between our brain and our body with our endocrine system. And people began a lot of issues, sleep issues, eating issues. They lost a sense of regulation. And believe it or not, this can impact your immune system over time. So this impacts mental health, and that impact mental health is physical health. And it causes a whole cascade effect that can cause people to have all sorts of illnesses. What we're seeing in psychiatry come from this pandemic is we're seeing a lot of people become aware of that anxiety and how it impacted them and how it shifted their mood and helped them not be able to function as well. And that's one of the reasons why the Mental Health Awareness Action Day was developed.
And Dr. Atkisson, when you think about medical school educators and the faculty physicians and researchers that are teaching medical students, what does this kind of stressor look like for a faculty member at a medical school?
So I think, first of all, I do want to make a comment from a long line of educators myself. I think all educators tend to be very well intentioned. They want to offer their best to their students, and they really sacrifice in order to do that at all levels. But I think what happens with medical educators in particular is they become acutely aware that this is a life and death matter. What their students are learning to do, those students will be touching other people, and those people's lives will hang in the balance. And so I think educators tend to be hardworking, well-intentioned, giving individuals, and I think they can be very perfectionistic, excuse me, especially in a medical school. And I think because of that, they really scramble to try to get everything done to the best of their abilities online. And they worked with students. And as you can see with me talking now, there's all kinds of things that can happen online. Your voice can tighten up and everything else. But they really scrambling to try to provide their best and to be perfectionistic. And I think that they did not realize that by doing that, many of them sacrificed their own wellness.
And I just want to let everybody watching know, if you just are tuning in, this is FWMD Live, and it is Mental Health Awareness Month. Today is the inaugural Mental Health Action Day. And today we're talking about how educators can actually fight COVID-19 fatigue off during the summer months and kind of re-energize and recharge themselves for the next school year coming up. If you have any questions, I have a panel of experts. Just jump into the comments, leave your questions, and then I will definitely get you some answers. So I want to shift this conversation to higher education, and even when we think about K through 12 education. Dr. Alexander, when you hear Dr. Atkisson talk about this chronic stress loop that educators can find themselves in, how is it different for educators in higher education or even K through 12, the stressors?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the stressors are the same. I think, when you're trying to deliver education to students at any level, those stressors are going to be the same. I mean, the content you're covering, the expectations are still going to be very similar, whether you're teaching first grade, teaching first year college students, graduate students. So, I think those are very similar. I think, when I think of the stressors in higher education, I would say they're probably very similar to what the medical educators are experiencing. I can say, like, for myself, I might teach a class that meets 3 times a week for an hour or 1 time a week for 3 hours. So there's not as much of a time commitment to the time I'm actually teaching. But I think of the K-12 educators, like, they're really experiencing, I think, a lot of stress. And, I can't emphasize how hard they have worked this year to try to keep their students connected and to try to provide a high quality education for their students. I've been in touch with just a lot of teachers this year, both former students and colleagues that I work with at different schools. I think the stress that they're feeling is not much different in terms of where it's coming from, but it's just the fact that it seems to be ongoing. Think about a elementary school or a middle school teacher. They're kind of on call with their students for 7 hours a day. So that's a long time to be engaged with students. So they may have 5 or 6 classes that meet, and that doesn't count the extra time they're having to put in their own time to create resources so that they can distribute through whatever digital platform they're using. So that adds a lot of extra stress. Time that they may have been spending with family, recharging, watching a movie, reading a book, whatever they would do to kind of relieve some stress. They're now spending a lot of that time preparing extra materials, because whereas before you have everybody in class, now they may have half their students at home and they have to create a video that explains some instructions or explains a project. So that's extra time. And so, I think the stressors are the same, just the feelings of wanting students to succeed, wanting students to feel like that they are being supported, that they're being cared for, and that they're receiving a high quality education. All of those things I think are going to be common across the board. I think what's different is just the immediacy of the K-12 teachers, that their school day is so long, and even in this area in Fort Worth, they're still in school and they're going to be in school for 5 more weeks. So this has been a really long year. And I think that it's just the fact that there doesn't seem to be a lot of reprieve from those stressors right now, because there's just so much time invested in trying to provide that high quality education.
And so now that we're kind of in the I want to say like the core of this conversation, I want to talk about some strategies to actually come up with some solutions for some of these stressors that educators are actually feeling. So Dr. Allie, can you just talk to us a little bit about the solution that you've tried to come up with for faculty members at the School of Medicine?
Yeah, so as we were watching all of this play out, as the pandemic, first emerged in March, and then we saw what was happening to our educators, but then also what was happening to our clinician educators who were facing another level of trauma in the hospital settings. I reached out to Dr. Atkinson, and I reached out to her because I had been trying to identify strategies and had come across research where executive coaching has actually been found to be beneficial in terms of enhancing individual well-being and resilience. And I knew that that was the most that we could hope to do right now. And so one of the things that we did is I had a conversation about what I was concerned about, what was emerging in our own faculty, as well as in the medical education community at large, watching this play out on Twitter and in the national news. I was anticipating fully that we're going to also be dealing with some post-traumatic stress disorder right in our faculty. And so I wanted to get ahead of that curve with Dr. Atkinson's help. And so she worked with me, and thanks to her genius, developed a 4-week session where she really structured a curriculum that allowed faculty to, one, get an awareness of what these stressors look like and how they present both, physically and emotionally. And so give them that foundation. And then we worked, thankfully we have a cohort of trained executive coaching faculty to deliver this 4-week curriculum. And in that, I think we accomplished a couple of things, and Dr. Atkinson can also expand on this. Give them the tools to begin to start to unpack their own well-being and then identify individual strategies. But 2, going back to Dr. Atkinson's comment about our need to be socially connected. If we talk to faculty and our family and friends, that's the one thing that hit all of us uniformly, is this lack of connection. And so through those group coaching activities, they could then connect with their peers and then build a community of practice. So that's been, it launched July of 2020, and we're now, I think, wrapping up our 4th cohort. And we plan to continue that well into 2022, anticipating that we'll have some long-term effects after the pandemic and beyond.
And we do have some really good resources that Dr. Allie has provided. And we're going to put those in the comment section right now, just so everyone can kind of start to get some of these resources that they're talking about. Dr. Atkinson, I know you have went through the coaching program because you're a physician development coach. That is something that's unique to our curriculum in our school here at the School of Medicine, to kind of coach the medical students throughout their years with us in medical school. And it's completely separated from their grades. So when you think about applying some of these coaching strategies and techniques to faculty, how do you think it's different, or how much is it needed for faculty, as the same way Dr. Allie saw that there was a need that medical students needed it?
So the first thing I'm going to say about coaching is in going through the program that Dr. Allie developed and put together for the Physician Development Coach Fellowship, amazed at how coaching can be so effective. And there are a number of studies that show how coaching actually affects the brain and how it can impact the way that people view things, and it can even impact their ability to move forward and make positive change. When we work with someone from a coaching standpoint, we're partnering with them. That's what we're doing. We're partnering with them to help them walk through and develop what they're wanting to try to develop. And we're helping them see ways to overcome obstacles and ways to develop innovative ways to accomplish their goals. And so with this program, the goal for everyone was to work, it was a stated goal at the beginning, was to work on ways to improve your wellness. And one of the things that really amazed me with some of the questions we asked is that many people actually don't stop and think about all the small ways that you can impact your wellness positively during the day. And one of the outcomes of some of our cohorts who have gone through, and these are brilliant people, is making statements such as, I didn't realize how powerful or how effective it would be to take a few minutes a day just to practice mindfulness. I found I could do it at different times. I mean, I'll never forget one of them who was so busy because she was converting everything over, and like many women had children at home, and she was dealing with all of this at once. And she said, I didn't have a lot of time during the day, but I suddenly realized that a lot of tasks I do, like loading and unloading the dishwasher, I could do mindfulness during that time. You also heard me mention the environment. One of the things that has really emerged from this is people are getting back in touch with how healing it can be to be out in nature. And I don't necessarily mean out backpacking all across the Rockies, but just going out and taking a walk in your neighborhood, observing the sunlight, observing what's around you. That's actually practicing mindfulness in a very healthy environment. So what we did with coaching is we asked questions to help them think about things they could do, how they could be empowered to take control of their wellness.
And we did have a question. Thank you for your question from our viewer. The question is, post-COVID, how will education remain forever changed? And then also, how can we support educators through the transition from full lockdown back to in-person teaching? Dr. Alexander, when you think about higher education in K through 12, when you come up with the fall semester that's going to roll around in a few months, what are some of the things that you're hearing that educators are trying to implement to kind of help with that transition from sort of this Zoom and digital learning to back to more in-person learning?
Well, I think a lot of educators started off in the face-to-face environment. So, it may be just a matter of, reacquainting themselves with that format. I think the bigger issue that some of them are going to have to overcome is maybe some of the anxiety they feel with being in a room full of people. That's something that before all of this started, I don't think there were a lot of folks that had those anxieties. I mean, there always have been people that became anxious when they're in a room full of people, but most educators were used to it. Now suddenly there's going to be a new level of anxiety about this room full of kids, room full of other teachers. Who could someone be sick? Is something going to start up again? Are we going to be back in the place where we started? So I think that's probably where they need to put the focus, is just reacquainting people to being back together and becoming accustomed again to seeing each other's faces and to being in enclosed spaces. And I'm not the public health person, so I don't know when it's going to be fully safe to do all that. So I'm not trying to make any commentary, but I know that that's going to be something to have to get used to, is to get people comfortable being with each other again.
And that's actually a really good point, Dr. Alexander. So Dr. Atkisson, when you think about going back to fully doing things in person and being in a classroom with 20 students or 30 students, what are some ways that maybe educators can deal with anxiety about that feeling?
I think the very first thing that everyone needs to do, including educators, is to give themselves some grace and to understand it's going to be completely normal to have anxieties about going back on board in the workplace. I also think that we shouldn't expect ourselves to snap back just like a rubber band either. I think we should all be aware that we're going to have some anxiety, that we will need to do some things to help ourselves. And this goes back into some of what I talked about earlier about what we put in our mind and being intentional about things. I think taking a few moments every day to sort of stop, take your own emotional pulse, if you will, acknowledge to yourself if you're feeling stressed, and then ask yourself, what are the things that I can do to take some control and get some mastery over how I'm feeling? And I think being intentional and doing planning in advance will help, but also acknowledging to yourself you're going to have those feelings. Dr. Alexander mentioned something so important, and that is connection. All of the educators are going to be feeling the same way. And I think that if those folks could kind of come together and just talk about that and support each other and develop a community of support, that will help enormously, because this is a journey that we're all walking together. People are not alone in this, even though they've felt isolated during the pandemic.
And Dr. Allie, I do want your on that as well, because obviously our faculty are physicians and researchers, so maybe they might feel a lot better about the science, and maybe that might relax them a little bit more. But is this a conversation that you plan to have with faculty members as things get more back in person?
Yeah, I would say that many of our faculty and their department chairs and other leaders are already starting to have these conversations as we start to plan for our return to campus. And I would echo what both Dr. Alexander and Dr. Atkinson have said in terms of creating the space to be prepared to go into that space and not expecting that you should be fully beyond all of these stressors, that somehow come whatever date it is that you need to show up to class, that we're just flipping the switch and nothing from the past 15 months is impacting how we're approaching each other or our learners. So I think that that's one. The other thing that I would also emphasize is find your community. And we've seen this play out. Primarily our medical educators have either found their local community through their here at the school through chat or the group me's, or but even online through the social media and the listservs, I've seen such an incredible gathering of community of educators coming together, facing the same challenge and crowdsourcing and reaching out to help each other through this. And so I would say that will probably continue, and yes, that's.
All right. And we did have a question from the audience. Thank you, audience member, for your question. We appreciate it. The question is faculty coaching like teaching, or is it something different? I had the same question when I first started at the School of Medicine and I started learning about the physician development coach program. So Dr. Allie, can you kind of explain to us how coaching kind of differentiates itself from being a mentor or a teacher?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm happy to start, but I think that Dr. Atkinson, who is now an officially accredited coach, would have a lot to share as well. When you think about teaching and education, right, it is sharing of knowledge. It is passing on skills. It's helping learners develop those skills through your expertise and your input. Coaching is really centered on the individual who's being coached. So the coach is facilitating individual growth as opposed to passing on advice, guidance, mentoring. You're really getting those individuals who are on the receiving end of a coaching encounter to really reflect internally, become empowered on their own, set their own goals, and set their own path forward. So that would be the distinction between teaching and coaching. But I'm sure Dr. Atkinson, as an accredited coach, could embellish on that even more.
Go Dr. Atkinson, before you add to that, we did get another question from the audience. So from Mental Health America suggests getting out of thinking traps. So when you think about getting out of thinking traps, is this a form of mindfulness that you're supposed to be practicing to do that?
Absolutely. Well, I think a thinking trap is when your brain begins to develop a loop, often caused by anxiety or uncertainty, and you're not prepared to be able to deal with that. If you practice mindfulness, one of the best things about mindfulness is that it really does begin to calm and regulate the neurotransmitters. There's even been studies with MRIs that show this. There have even been studies that show that there's actually shifts in the brain causing some brain changes that indicate this could even be preventative against some things such as Alzheimer's. And so it has a way of rebalancing the brain, and it helps you be able to move out of those thinking traps. I really wanted to quickly comment on what Dr. Allie mentioned about coaching versus teaching. One of the beautiful things about coaching is you can partner with someone and walk through an experience with them. You don't have to be an expert in their field to do that. And so that's another way that it really differs from teaching. It's helping that individual take what they know within themselves and develop their path.
All right. I just want to let everybody watching know this is FWMD Live. Today, we are talking about how educators can fight off COVID-19 fatigue. I have a panel of experts in education and also in medical education and also psychiatry. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments and then I will get you some answers. Dr. Alexander, I want to come to you and just talk a little bit about resources for college educators. Are there some resources for educators within the community that TCU may be offering right now?
Well, at TCU, we have resources. We have a counseling center. We have workshops and individuals that people can meet with through HR and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of services offered through TCU. In talking with people who are working on K-12 campuses, it's kind of being handled by building. The principal's the one kind of looking out for the teachers. At the college level, it's probably department chairs, deans, looking out for their faculty members. But, I think most importantly, it's colleagues looking out for each other. Just taking time to check in. If you happen to be on campus, stopping by and off the office, standing at the doorway, just asking how things are going. I think that in the last 18 months or whatever, for me, what's made the biggest difference is just being able to connect with colleagues. So yeah, there are some resources, mostly, for K-12 teachers, the building principals can point you toward those. At TCU, HR, and the counseling center, they have all kinds of resources available, people that can meet with you, that can talk with other faculty. But I just, think it's really important as colleagues and friends just to look out for each other.
And Dr. Alexander, when you mentioned the idea of the anxiety of being in person and then switching from doing things over Zoom, et cetera, giving education, there are some techniques that educators might have picked up during the pandemic that have actually been helpful for students, right? And so when you think about going back to in-person learning, should educators try to incorporate those techniques and not just get rid of them completely?
Oh, there's a lot of stuff I think that's going to be around from here on out. And it's stuff that's maybe been around already, just wasn't being used very much. Just the fact that so many of the resources a teacher could use now can be digitized and shared on a platform that can be accessed from really anywhere, from a phone, from a tablet, from home, from on vacation. I mean, I've heard of kids, they take a trip with the family and they're doing school from the car, right? So it's going to look a lot different here on out. I don't know that students will ever stop asking professors, I can't be in class. Is there a Zoom link I can use, right? That will probably be around forever. And I think professors are going to have to be the ones that create those boundaries, when is it okay to distribute those resources? What do they want digitized and what do they maybe want to keep in a format that's, maybe how they had it before. So yeah, I think just the digitization and kind of the ubiquitous access to educational resources is something moving forward that's not going to change.
And Dr. Allie, have you seen some things that have worked really well in the digital space during the pandemic that you're kind of encouraging faculty members at the medical school to maybe continue using?
Yeah, I think picking up on Dr. Alexander, I think the technologies that we were forced to use, some of them had been around for a while, but I think some of them have actually proven to be pretty effective at engaging our learners. And so I would imagine more and more partnering with instructional design teams as a regular practice, as well as leveraging your academic technology staff members to identify what are the appropriate ways that we can continue engagement, whether it's using virtual platforms for sharing of ideas, small group work, or whatever that is, sharing of other resources, even as we're back face to face. I would imagine that those are going to continue.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing that I wanted Dr. Atkisson to touch on is the idea that typically teachers and physicians are the people that others turn to for help with life stressors, right? But when it's the opposite way around, what are some ways that educators can kind of use some visualization techniques to help improve their wellness and reconnect, Dr. Atkisson?
I had mentioned earlier about how important it is in any pursuit of wellness that it's an active and intentional pursuit. Visualization is a way in which everyone can actively and intentionally pursue goals and paths forward. If you stop and think about it, do any of us go anywhere usually without knowing what our route is going to be, mapping it out in some way, looking it up? No, we don't. And so how do we expect we would be well without doing that either, right? So I think with visualization, what you do is you intentionally think about where you want to eventually go, knowing it's going to be a journey you'll be doing your whole life. But as you think about that, visualize and imagine yourself as already being there. Because by thinking of where you're going to be, where you wish to be in terms of your wellness, it helps you be able to make that path much more easily. We actually do exercises and coaching with that because we have learned that if you can tap into the visual part of the brain, it actually tends to help people be much more creative about being able to cognitively develop a strategy to reach that point that they wish to get to.
And Dr. Atkisson, we had a question from the audience. Thank you for the question. And the question is, for those having trouble taking the steps toward their very first coaching session as an educator, are there any tips to kind of reduce those fears or the barriers that they may be imagining?
So here's two things about coaching I really want to emphasize. A lot of times people misinterpret it and think it's therapy or counseling. It's not. When someone comes to work with a coach, the coach is looking at their client as someone who is creative, resourceful, and whole. That is the lens we look at our client through, because we know the client is the best expert on themselves and that they have the answers within themselves. And so we literally partner with them to help them unlock those answers. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is there's a lot of work that has been done with doing research in coaching. We now know a lot of the science behind it. We know that it is a very positive experience for people that can positively impact the brain. And if you are a client being coached, if you ever feel something's not working, you need to tell your coach, because a good coach will ask you those questions so that you are comfortable and that you feel you're in a safe place. And coaches do keep confidentiality.
And I want to pose this last question to all three of you all. I'll start with you, Dr. Alexander. When you think about being an educator and your purpose, right? And you think about being a role model for students and seeing the joy when a student actually like struggles with something and then the light bulb goes off and it's like they've gotten it. What are some ways that for yourself you have kind of connected with that purpose so you can find joy in providing education and not focus so much on the idea of in-person versus digital and et cetera?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. I would say for me over the last year, really my sources of joy have just come in those kind of those maybe moments in the past that I would have overlooked, where I'm able to have just a brief conversation where a student wants to ask a question and we can spend a few minutes, just having small talk, talking about what's going on, talking about football, whatever. And, so for me, those moments of joy, I've just been, as Dr. Atkinson has said so many times, just being more mindful of maybe the small beauties in life that I would have overlooked, and being grateful for those.
And Dr. Allie, have you talked to the faculty at the School of Medicine about finding those sparks of joy and just understanding that the purpose is still there?
That's a great question. And we have not had that conversation, but I am going to have it. But I for my own teaching, I would say it's very similar. For the faculty, as they were confronting these challenges, they also had learners that were confronting their own challenges. And so to Dr. Alexander's point, I started every one of my teaching sessions about a half hour before, getting in the right positive mindset so that I could be the best that I could be for them. And I did find that very intentional practice did actually make my learning environment, to the best of my ability, exactly what I would, actually more than what I had hoped would be possible through Zoom, to be honest with you, even as I was staring at a sea of black screens as the semester went on. So I would encourage people to, even as we return back face to face, take that moment to reconnect to your purpose and why you do what you do. And it actually did make my semester these past two semesters pretty powerful.
And Dr. Atkinson, have you had to have these conversations with people during the pandemic about reconnecting with their purpose in their careers?
I absolutely have. And one of the things I've really encouraged them is a sense of connection. They need to have connection to their peers. They need to have connection to their support group, to their family, and to their faith, even if it all had to be online. I do want to make a comment about connection for all the educators. Never underestimate how even a small thing can make such a difference. I can tell you of a college student I've seen in the past a long time ago who said to me that the only reason she had not harmed herself is because the educator had just talked to her about, I can tell you're having a hard time. I understand how that is. It did send a bit of chills down my spine when I learned that educator was someone I had worked with previously also. So never, ever underestimate connection and how one small thing can have a ripple effect and be so important.
All right. And on that note, that will do it for today's FWMD Live discussion. I want to thank everybody on Facebook for being a part of today's live chat and leaving your questions. And I also want to give a very big special thanks to our guests, Dr. Allie, Dr. Atkinson, and Dr. Alexander. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. Once again, I want to thank everyone for watching, and we will see you soon.